Cure America, I'm Star Parker, and as you know from last week's show, the election 2024 has begun. We were down there in Charleston bringing you live Nikki Haley's announcement. Now there's more, so we'll talk about that later on the panel. We're also going to talk about all these months that we have to celebrate different diversities, I suppose. It might be divisive. We'll see what our panel has to say. Then we're also going to look at a new report. Cure has a new report at curepolicy.org on the weaponization of race. As we're leaving Black History Month, going into now Women's History Month, and no telling what comes after that History Month. We thought maybe we should look at these race questions a little bit deeper, and even some myths. So we'll get into that with our own Cure policy analyst, Raheem Williams. But first, I want to introduce you to a new addition to our Cure team here at Cure America. As you know, this is just one part of our three-part programs. We do policy, we do media, we do clergy, and this is part of media, but now we're going into our new Clergy Center director. Omarr C. Peters has joined our team from the great state of Mississippi. Thanks for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me on. Thank you so much for hiring me.
Well, you know, it's interesting because we have a sign in our break room, as you know, that says you don't have to be crazy to come here because we can train you on that. So I'm wondering, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I want to know what drew you to say, I want to join your team.
Yes. Well, I was born in the great city of New Orleans, Louisiana. I was raised in a small city called Macomb, Mississippi, where I spent most of my formative years as the son of now a former pastor and his wife. And I was educated at Mississippi College, and now I've worked for several nonprofit organizations, and now I'm here at Cure.
Well, you told me you liked us when you applied. You said, Star, you actually know me because you were at Mississippi State, and we do these open houses every year during the March for Life, and you actually brought students to Cure, and I didn't realize that. I had met you before, and you brought students up for their first March for Life. Was that your first March for Life as well?
That was. Okay. I grew up what I call a flaming liberal. Okay. I grew up pro-choice, pro-this, pro-that, whatever the case may be.
Whatever liberal said be, you were that.
I was that.
Okay.
But I had a religious and social and political transformation in college. Wow. Where the Lord just arrested me, and he arrested my heart and said, son, you're doing the wrong thing.
Wow,
you believe the wrong thing.
Why? Where were you? He just kind of tapped you on your shoulder by yourself? Or really?
He did. Actually, he told me before before I entered college to go to Mississippi College, which is a private Baptist university. And he said, I'm sending you here for a purpose. Now wait. And then in the middle of it, I get connected with different people, new friends, and most college students, because in my previous work, I dealt a lot with college students. So obviously I brought college students with me to the march. So what I really did was I talked with my professor, and most college students have that liberal professor that gets on their nerves. I had the conservative that didn't. I had a conservative professor that prayed with me. Okay. I had a conservative professor that did not teach his bias. His bias came out. Everybody's does.
And so that was already provoking you to say, to question yourself and what you were. And so then you went to the Lord and said, I sent you here for a purpose. Wow. I sent you here to change you and to change your trajectory. Whoa.
And it took, the pro-life part took a few more years, but I became full circle in 2019.
Wow.
A fully economic conservative, free market idealism. I became that person in life. And it's come with its own challenges. Some people won't talk to me.
Right.
Sometimes you can't bring it around family members.
No,
yes.
That's why whenever we're talking cancel culture in the general population that some in our society are just finding out exists, it's like, well, I was canceled the minute I got born again.
Exactly.
And sometimes from your own family, or especially when you then say, I'm going to align my Christian perspective with my political perspective, then you run into real challenges in family life. But I'm back at if this all occurred during 2019, the March for Life that you attended was 2020, because that was the first one. Well, so why did you come here? How did you know about the march to even attend? And then your first one, you bring students with you.
Right. So what I did was I was a field representative for a while with the a group called the Leadership Institute.
Okay.
That was my
I'm
first.
on their board.
Yes.
Yes. Leadership. Morton Blackwell's group is an incredible training ground for young people. Go ahead.
They're an amazing organization,
they really
as
are.
you know.
Yeah.
But I was their field representative for Mississippi and Alabama.
Okay.
But that was a contractor's position. When that position ended, I had made friends, obviously. I made friends with someone that worked for Students for Life of America. And she said, well, I got this HBCU group. I want you to meet them. I want you to bring them up here with you.
So that's what happened. And then you're like, I'm going to bring them even though I haven't been myself. It's just going to open up a whole new perspective on life. And I think what was really compelling, I just want our audience to know, is that when we have this reception, because sometimes during the march it's blizzarding, it's cold, and the die-in is right at the White House, 2 blocks from here at our Cure office. So the kids would lie down in the snow. They didn't care. They just pretend they were dead, just like the babies, in front of the White House. They cover with red so that we can get the attention. So we then at Cure said, they're so cold before they even go to the march, so maybe we better have them come through, get some hot chocolate and things like that. And that group typically is a white group because the march is overwhelmingly white, and much more overwhelmingly Catholic. And so you guys showed up at the same time, and I've told the story 100 times that here you have this all-black group from Black College here, sitting here with all white kids from a high school. But when the pizza arrived, they didn't know the difference. It was like everybody was best of friends. And so I just wanted to put that moment on the table. Is that when you fell in love with us at Cure, or was it before that?
I did.
Okay.
That's when I was introduced to Cure. One of the first things I noticed, you had Morton Blackwell's 40 Laws of Public Policy on your wall. And I said, this is the place to be. And God was arresting me saying, I'm going to send you here.
Wow.
Ask about it and then wait. Because I remember having this conversation with you, asking about it. And you said, well, follow up with me. And then it was a waiting period. So I went, worked for other organizations.
You were lost in the thousands and thousands of emails that I got, or you just had to wait anyway? I don't know what happened there.
I just believe it was the Lord. It was just the Lord's purpose.
And the timing, too, because we did put a shout out through one of our staffers that we need to now expand our Clergy Center. And you immediately applied. And when you said you had been here and you had high recommendations, we thought, okay, so it is the Lord. Let's do this. So let me ask you then, your top concerns, like why here? What was beyond the question of pro-life and the policies that we kind of support? What made you think that this was the place for you when you look at your own concerns about what's happening in our country and in our culture?
For one, I wanted to work for a place that had a biblical worldview. I've worked for places where people are Christian, they live their faith, at least most of the time, but they couldn't outwardly express it through the workplace. My parents always taught me to live your faith in work and when you're not at work, because God will ultimately judge you for all of it, obviously. So I wanted to work for that place. I wanted to work for a place that is aspired to teach people about personal responsibility, about freedom, because God freed me and taught me about freedom. I wanted to help others. And I believe this unique opportunity that I've been given, I've been blessed with, obviously, is going to help connect me with so many different people, and we at Cure are uniquely positioned to train these pastors, to get them the training that they need, to get them the messaging that they need to help cure their communities, and help them figure out the problems and cure their problems that associates itself with race, with culture, and with poverty. I'm a big cultural war person. I believe that for a long time we've been failing, and that's part of the church. And that's because the church has been silent, but silent no more.
Right, and I think silent, it's interesting you would say that, because I started Cure knowing that they weren't silent deliberately, they just didn't have enough information.
Exactly.
And when you give people information, the lights go on, then they know what to do with that information. So we don't have to hold their hand through. And I think that
Exactly.
There's been too much trying to hold hands through the whole establishment of the government to put all these barriers in the way of people living free. You know, we don't have a whole lot of time, but we do have a policy summit coming up October. And this, you came in the door and it's like, okay, here's what you have to do. So what is your first goal to make sure that that policy summit we're all looking at and saying, what an asset Omarr C. Peters is to our organization?
Yes. Well, we do have our policy summit coming up in October. The first thing we're going to be sending out save the dates for it. We have so many plans for that.
You can't tell right now.
Exactly. We can't do it right now.
Right now, we can't tell them what our plans are. But you're going to try to get as many pastors and youth pastors here.
As many pastors, because and I know
secret.
Exactly. But as we've discussed before, everybody reaches 10 people, whatever 2 family members, 2 friends, 2 people that they work with, and so many others. But everybody reaches 10 people.
The demographers say they actually not only reach them, they change their minds.
Exactly.
This is why polls, you guys, are so small, because you're going to change the mind of 2 people, whether it's 2 friends, 2 neighbors, 2 family members, 2 co-workers, or 2 total strangers.
Exactly.
A total stranger just says, "Oh, that's so cute. Where'd you get it?" And then you're telling them all about it, and then they're buying it too. So you're right.
So our pastors, they change the lives of so many people. They change their minds, and they're mentoring and helping them get closer to Christ. So if we reach those pastors, we train them, we get them the messaging they need, and we make sure that they're able to cure those problems in their communities, and then we become their voice to the Congress. And we become their voice, hopefully, to the presidency when it changes.
When it changes. We are telling this president to slow down, stop.
Yes.
And in fact, many of our audience know that we were actually very instrumental in killing that BBB. He had that Build Back Better to try to put everybody on.
Broke.
Yeah, Build Back broke. Exactly. You remember that. So there are a lot of things that we have in mind. We just really want to thank you for being a part of CURE. And you guys, he's going to be on a lot more. You're going to see Omarr quite a bit, because as you know, we talk to pastors, especially when they're in town. You want to come through Washington, D.C. on a Wednesday. You even have plans for on Wednesdays that they can come and start seeing the show live?
Yes. We're starting that, especially with our CURE Connector office, which is not far from here, but we've got a lot of plans.
We've got plans, and that's going to be one place that you guys can meet us. And Wednesdays, that's what we're. In fact, Marty called it Welcoming Wednesdays. Probably starting in about June. We're going to just open the doors. COVID will be behind us, and allow for people to come in and experience what we're doing here at CURE. And we really thank you for joining us, and I look forward to our audience hearing more from you, Omarr. When we come back, I want to talk to you about this new report that CURE did. You know, we're doing policy too, and weaponization of races throughout all aspects of government. This administration that is in town is just obsessed with race, and therefore they're expanding DEI, they're expanding their racial footprint into areas that we don't even know that they should be, including things like ESG and other areas. So when we come back, we're going to talk to our policy analyst from here at CURE, Raheem Williams, right after this important message.
I know it's not my words that helps a person, it's God's word. It's the power of the gospel.
God loves you, but sin separates us from God. God sent his son, Jesus Christ, from heaven to this earth to take our sins. He died on a cross for our sins. He was buried for our sins, but on the third day, God raised his son to life. God is patient with us. He's not wanting anyone to perish. The Bible says, but he wants everyone to come in repentance. And so if you come tonight to Christ, you've got to come willing to turn from your sin. You say, well, Franklin, I don't think I can. But you ask Christ into your heart, he'll give you that strength. He'll give you that power. But you've got to be willing to say, God, help me. I want to change. I want to trust you. By faith, trust Jesus Christ.
Yep, I have another guest for you. Actually, some of you know Raheem Williams because he's been on before. But before I get into the interview with him, I want to just thank you. We have now picked up 5 networks. You're one of 5. Well, if you're one, then you're one of 4 others. Networks that are now carrying Cure America with Star Park. And we want to thank you because we are just like growing and want to grow more. So if you have a friend that's not picking it up, have them go to curepolicy.org and we'll drop it in their box, their email, on Mondays, or wherever you're seeing it, if you're on one of our networks, whether it's TCT or NRB or now Jack Hibb, everywhere we're being carried, you might want to just refer them there. But of course, we would love them on our website, curepolicy.org, on our list so that they will then get the reports that we're getting ready to talk about. They're on the website, but they will get them in their inbox, and you can get it in your inbox too if you sign up at curepolicy.org. We'll send it to you. And we're not going to send you all kind of other junk. We don't sell our list. We're not doing any of that kind of stuff. We'd rather slowly grow, and your gifts will help us grow, but we'd rather slowly grow than to just start sending a lot of junk mail. So Raheem Williams, he's policy analyst here at Cure, and he's going to tell us a little bit about this weaponization of race, how it hurts America. It's a new report. You and Marty have signed off on. Myself, I'm on this report, but it addresses basically a lot of the challenges that we've seen race in America, and I think that we're going to get into a whole lot of questions and go deeply diving into this report in August on the anniversary of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, because you heavily point to that. But welcome to Cure America again.
It's a pleasure to be here, Star. You know, I always love coming to work, working with you, working with our team, and it's absolutely amazing to see how well the show's doing.
Yeah, it is good, huh? And I'm telling you, the office, I walk in and you guys are just chatting it up, and I'm thinking, wait, why are they not all like that?
We work sometimes.
We're thinking. They're thinking. So you guys have been thinking about this weaponization of race and how it hurts America. We're getting out of Black History Month. A lot of discussion on race, but it still seems we're so divided as a country. Is this because we focus too much on race?
I would say there are people who find it politically advantageous to weaponize our racial differences, and our report really covers how that's kind of evolved in the later half. You had kind of these beautiful moments that seem like racial reconciliation was possible, and that kind of starts with Dr. King's speech. And there was even a brief moment during the after the Obama election where people thought that would happen. But what our report details is how those moments became fleeting and why they didn't actually kind of materialize into a post-racial society. And a lot of that is because there are people who purposely inflame race, and you probably experienced it as a Black conservative. And we kind of talk about how Cori Bush attacked Brian Donalds for no reason, basically calling him a prop and more or less words a token for essentially believing in things like, I don't know, like aborting massive amounts of Black babies is wrong.
Right.
So
yeah.
that's
all of a sudden,
yeah.
you sold out to the race. But you know, it's interesting though, Raheem, because majority of Black Christians agree with the conservative right on these issues that you're pointing out in this particular report. Why aren't we seeing more expressions, even in the internet, where people can be a little bit anonymous to say, come on, stop using us as your excuse to further an agenda that's inconsistent with the country?
Well, I don't want to give away too much of the report, but I think that's kind of the value of this report, is it does kind of expose their methodology of the sorts, right? And it doesn't always go, how do you say this, at a textbook. There aren't always riots. One of the cases in the report points out the South Carolina case. You had the shooting of Michael Scott, and you also had that gruesome church shooting in Charleston. And what you saw was Nikki Haley, much to her credit, then governor, was able to reach across the aisles, bring the community together, and they rejected outside agitators, and they said, you know what, hate will not live here. Wow. They brought down that Confederate flag, and Democrats and Republicans came together, and they said, you know what, this is not what we want to be about. And that's what we have to start, that's how we have to respond to these agitators. Because, again,
more people need to respond, and I think that more African Americans need to respond with the white Americans that are saying, come on, enough of this. We've done everything. Let's become e pluribus unum, which I'm going to talk to our panel about a little bit, because I want you to get into dispelling 3 common myths on black advancement, because I think that this is one of the reasons we still have such tension. These myths are out there, and they live large in black communities and black circles, even in black churches, to where we're taught fear first. Even above our own faith, we're told to put your fear above your faith, to put your color before your Christ, et cetera, et cetera. So let's get into some of these myths that you pointed out, if you will. The first myth, you say, now this is another study, right? This is up on the website too? Yes. Can they find this on the website? Okay, so the Dispelling 3 Common Myths on Black Advancement. This is Raheem's work here at CURE as policy analyst. And he has a long resume of policy analyzing, so I hope that they're putting it in the Chiron, or you'll see his bio up on our website. But the first one you say is the racial political representation improves black condition. I don't know why I'm
so the first myth.
So tell us this.
The first myth is this idea that if you elect more people that look like you, reflect your race, right, then your condition will improve dramatically. So, one, I want to be very clear, there's nothing wrong with voting for black people. I mean, there are black candidates that are very good and qualified at what they do. And when politicians of any color get results, positive results and outcomes for their constituents, they should be reelected. Right. So we argue for a merit-based approach. It's like, exactly what have you done for our communities? How are you advancing our communities? That's what we at CURE believe the conversation should be about, more so than white versus black. We don't look at the word. Because these are
gerrymandered districts, and 100% of those that have the majority blacks in their districts are sent back to Washington. And it is a legitimate question to say, okay, being black doesn't seem to be working for the community because matters are getting worse.
So what I took a look at was what happened with the racial wealth gap. So using some MBRE data, I was able to recreate a graph that showed the racial wealth gap in the election of black representatives in Congress. And what you notice is the time immediately following the Civil War, after slavery ended, the gap started to close very fast. And the reason that is because we were starting off with nothing. So coming from nothing to something, you're going to see that. But around 1965, it starts to slow. And that's actually very interesting, because that's an era that's kind of denoted, for the Civil Rights Act, Civil Rights Movement, and kind of this great racial reckoning. And then even something more peculiar, since the 90s, it's actually gotten worse.
Right. Right.
And in this time, you've seen the amount of black elected officials skyrocket. Right. They went from 2 to 3 in Congress to, I believe, around 53 today. Right. And more so, and we only have limited data to go by this, around 2000 around 2000 and the 2010s, you see the number of elected black officials in this country on every level, from city council to state legislature, attorney general's office, every level of government, go from about 1,800 in the 1970s to over 10,000.
Oh, wow.
And as this is happening, we see the black-white wealth gap essentially either stagnate or get worse. Right. So I'm not trying to blame those representatives, right? You can't put that blanket on everybody.
But everybody you can legitimately ask the question, well, being black alone is not the answer. Maybe we should be looking elsewhere as we keep having these racial discussions as if that is the answer.
You have to look at platforms carefully, and you can't just assume. And, our progressive friends love to say it, and I'll say it too. All skin folk ain't kinfolk. So it's really just that simple. It's like, just the assumption here is that a black politician is better than a white politician just isn't true, or an Asian politician or a female politician. That's not how this works.
Yeah, well, you can see that fall apart with them when they just say, but a black conservative doesn't qualify either.
Of course, right? They always have those qualifiers.
So this is really interesting, but I don't want to run out of time to get into myth 2, because this study is on our website as well, so people can look through all of the details of it. But the second one you say is reparations. You're talking about reparations. You said are a feasible solution to black equality concerns. Oh, equity concerns. I'm sorry, I can't read with my glasses. Okay, so you say reparations continue to be a hot topic in the debate over racial equity. Talk to us about that a little bit.
So what you see with reparations is kind of like this carrot that gets dangled out there, right? Every few years a bill gets introduced. Conveniently, when Democrats aren't in power, they like to throw the bill out there.
Right, and that's true.
So there's a big issue. I believe Sandy Durst, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, he's a black economist at Stanford. He estimated the cost to be $14 trillion. It's about 50% of U.S. GDP, so that's astronomical. It will be the largest expense ever seen. How does he suppose suppose we pay for it? He has no idea.
Okay. How does he suppose that we decide who gets in the line for the reparation?
That's also very much unclear because a lot of black people who are descendants of slaves, guess what? Record keeping in 1839 isn't as great as it is today.
That's right.
So a lot of people who actually would be in theory entitled to the money wouldn't get it. And then you also have the issue of, well, who's going to pay? Are you asking people who have never owned slaves? Mm-hmm. Maybe even come from families that never owned slaves, that immigrated in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, or even more recently, to pay for sins that they had nothing to do with. And is that actually fair?
Yeah, we had a discussion about that here in the office because, there are now localities that are saying we have to do what they're calling reparations. And Marty brought up a really interesting point that there's a difference between reparations and restitution. If someone has erred against you, and according to Scripture, you do go to them and you do repay. You repair. So that's an interesting point you're making. Those that had nothing to do with that sin, but where you do have a person who says, I can prove to the court of law that this was done to me, that would be considered restitution, not a reparation. And I think that liberals are often just mixing words and meanings of words to get people confused.
And you're absolutely right, because when you look at it from a restitution standpoint, there's a lot of people who'd be left out of this payment plan, right?
That's exactly right.
Ileana Omarr, she's first generation American, straight from Africa. She's an immigrant, nothing wrong with that, but her ancestors were not slaves in America.
Right.
Barack Obama, similar story. So it's kind of like these people, the first black president wouldn't qualify.
Wow.
So think about that for a second. And not only that, is more nuanced because there are people who more or less look white, present as white people that do have slavery ancestry. So you have these cases where they didn't even know.
Did you just see that Angela Davis's relatives were on the Mayflower? They just discovered that Henry Louis Gates. They did that whole research into her.
Exactly.
For her, she joined the Communist Party for nothing. Okay, we only have one little minute to get through the third one. Diversity programs help elevate people of color. You said that this is a myth.
Well, so it creates a stigma, right? Nobody wants to believe the person that their manager or their coworker is being elevated for arbitrary reasons. Everybody wants to think their work is valued independently and for what it's worth. We like merit. We like to know that people who work hard earn things. And when you add race, when you add gender, when you add sexuality, and you say, hey, these are defining characteristics that are important to us, it makes other people feel resentful naturally because it's like, wait, hold on, I'm not gay, but I do really good work here. Why doesn't that matter? This is a corporation. This is a firm. This is an organization. Why isn't my work product what I'm being judged off of? Wow. It demeans black people and it creates resentment. So you see a Harvard economist did a huge study. He looked at 465 firms that had these diversity programs, and they actually found out that black people were less likely to get promoted in these firms because it created that resentment that otherwise wouldn't have been there. Before, you just assume people are being promoted in advance because they're good at their jobs, but you add this dynamic and it creates confusion that doesn't need to be there.
That's interesting because that's the original point that Clarence Thomas was making when he objected to affirmative action programs, which then caught up with him during his confirmation hearings, and all he was saying is, I want to be judged by merit, and I think all other African Americans should want the same. Thanks, Raheem. He does great work here at Cure, and here at Cure, and I'm so happy that he does a report a month almost now, so a whole lot more work. So you can see that at curepolicy.org. If you think I'm overselling curepolicy.org today, I guess I am. But next, I have a panel.
It's not possible. We do great work. We do great. Please brag. Please brag.
Right after this message, we'll be with our regular panel, Richard and Jonathan, and we're going to go all over the place. God birthed in my heart years ago to do this work of CURE, the Center for Urban Renewal and Education.
We are incredibly privileged to have pastors from across the nation here for training and collaboration on solutions to help our communities.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. It must be fought for.
The Declaration meant what it said. All men are created equal.
We're to awaken, train, and mobilize the the church as a whole, but the historically black church in particular, to end abortion in our communities.
Every church needs to do everything it can to help be an educational hub.
The crisis of the day is the sexual gone wrong, and it's going extraordinarily wrong. Us Christians are called to correct that by living the sexuality that God has given us.
It was the church who created the idea of educating every boy and girl. The idea of public health care, guess where that came from? The church. It was actually the church who was commissioned to do the work of charity. Guess who's actually robbed you of part of what it is that you're to do? It's government, and they failed miserably at it. They're not called to do it.
Government is not God.
Are we going to bow to government, or are we going to bow to God?
Kids need to see that confidence that we have about the truth. We're not in doubt about who we are.
Well, two of my most favorite people in the whole wide world are with me, and they're with me a lot, but not last week, so I'm glad to see Jonathan Alexandre back with us. Hello.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for having us. We're glad to have you here. And I know Charleston was a good time.
It was. We were specially invited, so we went down, and it was exciting. Nice. Oh my! In the second half, we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening in the election, because now Vivek is in, and he's exciting too.
Yes,
it's going to be fun. I think, hopefully, it's going to be fun. I mean, after a while, it's not going to be so fun, especially when there's 17 in there. Right. But in the meantime, we're going to talk about something else. This first segment, I got Rick back with me too. Rick Manning is a dear friend and co-author of Necessary Noise. We're thinking about bringing it back out. Yep. We'll see. The Trump factor seems to be going away a little bit, and we'll talk about that in a second, if it's going to be to our advantage to bring it back out. But at first, before we go into what's happening in election and what's happening in the political scene, I want to go off of what we were just discussing with my last panelist, Raheem Williams, who you both know. The weaponization of race didn't stop at the civil rights movement, where we had a heavy emphasis on race and needed some emphasis because Dr. King said, wait a minute, we have to stop this. We're Americans too. And when you think about his speech broken down into 3 parts, he first spoke to the nation, but he didn't try to overturn the nation. He didn't try to weaponize the nation or race. He just said, you've given us a blank check and we want to pay them. We want to be American. And then the second part, he talked to then the Negro, go back into your communities and build. We're there. Well, just go. Let's go live free. Basically what you guys talked about a few weeks ago, Frederick Douglass, go live. And then he talked, of course, to Christians, because we knew for some it would be hard. I mean, we have talking 4 million former slaves and many really, really abused. So it would take the Christian community to help transition these new folks into the family of America. But we're a long way from that, guys. We have now, Ariel pulled this for me. Black History Month. Women, that's this month, okay? We're going to be, and some people are going to see this, Women's History Month in March. Then we have another History Month before. We have a May History Month, Asian Americans Pacific Islanders Heritage Month. Then we have in June a Gay Month. Then we have in September a Hispanic Heritage Month. Then we have in November a National Native American Heritage Month. Okay, when I told the guys what I'm going to ask them, Richard said, well, do we have a redhead month? And I'm like, no. Maybe. What's going on? What is this?
Well, it's about making it so nobody's an American. It's about making it so we identify with the first word and not the last word, which is American. And if you want to destroy a culture, break it down any way you can by breaking down our culture based on race, based on how you identify yourself. By doing all those things, you're effectively creating everybody else as an other. And hence, you want to destroy a culture, balkanize it, and that's what's happening.
You know, I think, Jonathan, one of the problems I have with what they're calling balkanizing, and I want to get more into what that exactly means for people that are not familiar with the term, is that, e pluribus unum had meaning to our ancestors to become American, grafted in, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, but yet it seems that the democratization of our grievances, our desire to be free as a people and to be adopted into the American family is breaking down, as Richard just said. Now it depends on what culture you came from, not that you're in this beautiful experiment called America.
To your point, the E pluribus unum, what is very unique about America, it's the first country really on earth where you can be part of that country, be a citizen, your children born into that country are citizen just by assenting. You're assenting to these principles that everyone believes, and just by assenting to it, saying, I agree to these certain things, and among them being the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, that you're created by God and endowed by Him and deserve equal justice under the law. Basic principles, but all you have to do is assent to them, and you're a part of this. And that's very unique in this world.
It's a fascinating point.
In Muslim countries, you could even be born there, and unless you're part of that tribe or ethnically part of that, you can never be part of that culture. And so the American experiment and experience is unique in the rest of the world, and that assent, you can, as you mentioned, come from anywhere in this world, but you're assenting to those principles, and that what allows you to make American. What this does, several different months, and having folks identify first by either their skin color or their origin, is tribalism all over again. It's saying that no, there's something American, but no, what's most important is this tribe. And once again, it's easiest then to pit neighbor against neighbor if you are identifying first by the one thing that divides you.
Well, I'm then wondering if there's an agenda behind it, because you're mentioning the different types of ethnic groups that are wanting these different expressions. I want me too to be able to be my original first. But also we have a Gay History Month. So you mentioned the principles. Are we now so disunified in those founding principles that there is no common American culture anymore that lets people get away with this?
Well, that's what the attempt is. See, one of the interesting things is when I was a young man, when I was a kid, we were told actually
really red hair.
Really red hair. And I had more, and I actually
had a lot more of it.
A lot more of it. But more importantly than that, there was one of the things we were told is there's not really an American culture. Actually, I told that in school, and I'm like, wait a second, there's an American culture. What are you talking about? But it was so this is not new. The breaking down of American culture is something that's been going on, at least in the school I attended, 50, 60 years ago. And so maybe 40, 50 years ago, let's say that. Because I don't want to avoid the ageism.
We're not going to do the ageism stuff. We're not going to take any competency tests and be on media at least.
No, let's do it. Let's do the ageism.
No, because you're young. You're
no, I think it's reverse ageism.
But no, to your point though, okay, so there is an agenda behind this, because Jonathan, I think as you pointed out, the principles are rooted in a biblical worldview.
Absolutely.
The first president of the country told us that. Is that what is behind this agenda?
Well, you have to deconstruct. You have to start somewhere to deconstruct. And one thing that America brings with its principles is a moral standard as well. I tell folks this: it's not the gay issue that American morals or judicial principles came out in terms of human sexuality. That wasn't the first law. All 50 states in the country at a point had laws against adultery. They so understood that the marital vow was so important to the structure of the law and the structure of the culture that if a man or woman were to step out on their spouse, it'd be an illegal action. The law would punish them for doing that. So stemming from that, you had a culture of monogamy, a culture of family, because you could build then a society off of it. So,
and because it was a law, then the community shunned, and so there was in the culture an appreciation for there are rules to govern a society, a civil society, our kids and all the rest, and anyone that decided otherwise was like, we don't do that here. You shouldn't do that either. You could get even put out of your church. But now we're at the place where everything is acceptable. In fact, most of the polling has shown us that the youth are saying, hey, you can have a baby out of wedlock. We don't care. It just doesn't ever matter anymore. And so now, but I'm wondering though, with all these different heritage and ethnic groups, they're obviously not buying into that left-wing progressive philosophy.
Good point, yeah.
So why are they now needing their own little months? Why is it that, we have a special month for every group?
because it's politicians pandering to interest groups. As simple as that.
Okay.
There are, if you can sit there and you can pander and say, hey, I gave a special month and recognize you, leaders in those communities will hold you up and say, okay, he's fighting or she's fighting for me. When in fact, the way you fight for somebody who's who's in the lower percentage in the socioeconomic class, is you fight for them by trying to educate them about the importance of marriage, the importance of keeping families together, the importance, and oh, by the way, you make it so the schools our kids go to teach reading, writing, science, and not a bunch of other garbage.
That's right. And it does become garbage at this point. Now we're focusing on stuff, even we have black gay history.
Don't talk to me about specialized history months and the like when you're not teaching, when kids are coming out of high school and getting zero performance level in math and science, and they're graduating. That's a failure, and that's the racism. Racism is saying you don't deserve a good education because you happen to be at a school that is predominantly black.
That's right.
And that drives me nuts.
Or in a poor neighborhood. And it should drive us all nuts.
But we had Black History Month, so it's all okay.
History Month, you got everything that people, and never conservative voices during the Black History Month celebrations.
These things are fine when they're additions to, when they're a lens by which individuals view the world, or a unique story that could not have otherwise been told had you not had a week set apart, or maybe a month is too long, but a month set apart. But that's always in addition to the overall education goal and the overall direction and mission of the school. What's happening now is that we're replacing it. We're saying that these things are the most important things, and unless you view your whole education process by these limiting months, specific months, then we're not going to value your education at all.
But I would even push back on the first premise that we have to specially recognize and or not recognize, because when you think about the society, as diverse as we are. First of all, one person is going to feel that, well, maybe I don't belong in here at all because I've got all kind of stuff going on. Another might think, well, I don't have anything going on. Another one could be black and the only one in the classroom, and now all of a sudden the teacher's up there who's also not black has to teach about Black history. But I think a bigger concern for me is the cultural implications. It doesn't rest in just saying, hey, here's some people in history that we might want to recognize. And individuals get an opportunity to do that because they have to do reports on stuff. So if blacks want black emphasis, then their children or our children can do emphasis, and then the whole class gets to experience that. But the challenge now is what you brought up, Richard, the politicization of it. The politician gets to say, I did. And I think one of the reasons I'm really concerned is because now, after the politicians here in Washington and Joe Biden signed into law homosexual marriage, homosexual marriage. Why they changed names of everything else? Why did they have to call it marriage would be my first question. But number two, after he did that, Donald Trump had a gay gala at Mar-a-Lago celebrating
with the log cabins.
The log cabiners celebrated the signing of this law of homosexual marriage, and then him as a candidate said, and I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to fight hard for you. What does that mean? Fight for we got a month. So does that mean teaching? Does that mean new and expanded affirmative action policies? Hiring, every company has to hire someone and ask them if they're gay or not to make sure that we're meeting some kind of quota?
And two quick things to bring it full circle. The first thing that it does is, what does the homosexual union actually target? And within that bill that passed with signing the law, they target RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. So we're asking, how are these things weaponized, these select groups weaponized? They're targeting religion, they're targeting the American principles and targeting the opportunity for all people to be treated equally, but specifically with this homosexual agenda, targeting the individual's right to believe in God and express that in the public square if they don't buy into this gay agenda.
In the public square, we have now at the place where you can't even do your reports on Jesus Christ. You cannot do you can't bring Bible scripture to make your thesis. Everywhere, we're washing the very original principle of the country away, the Christian element of it, the biblical worldview. And that's a real problem for people that are saying, but I am a Christian and I want to live the life of Christianity and I want to express that life of Christianity. We were interviewing our newest staffer here, our team member, Omarr Peters, and he said one of the main reasons he joined this organization was because of the biblical worldview that we are pushing into public policy, making sure that it's always in public policy when it comes to culture race and poverty issues. So I thank you guys on that subject, but I want to keep it, okay, because we want to talk a little bit about, we're in election season already, and I guess I kind of introduced it because that's Trump's platform. I want to talk about a couple of others that are in there, their platform too, right after this.
Today, a student in public school will pray or lead a Bible study. Today, a pastor will preach boldly the truth of the Scriptures without fear of the IRS. Today, the life of an innocent child will be saved, and a mother will experience the joy of a newborn baby. A distraught woman will find hope and choose life rather than death. Today, there is a strong voice defending God's created natural order of marriage and family. There is a defender of freedom in the courtroom and in the halls of Congress and in legislative bodies across the land. Today, all of this is possible because of the ministry of Liberty Counsel. People from all over America will find help and hope because of Liberty Counsel. The adversity they face will be turned into victory, case by case, law by law, person by person. Liberty Counsel is advancing religious freedom, the sanctity of human life, and the family through litigation, education, and public policy. And that is the mission of Liberty Counsel, to restore the culture by advancing life, liberty, and family.
Well, I had to get out of that one fast, especially after mentioning President Trump. But Donald Trump is running for a re-election, election again, I guess you could say, on the GOP. And last week you saw us do Nikki Haley, a whole show on Nikki Haley, because we went down to Charleston. And of course, I'm getting feedback on that. Oh, she must be your candidate. Actually, I want to hear from all of them. And I want you to hear from all of them. So we are going to constantly talk about all of them. And now a new one has gotten in the race. So I still have Jonathan Alexandre with us from Liberty Counsel. You see their ad running throughout, and you know what they do, and especially after Jonathan just mentioned religious liberties. That's what they're doing all the time now, and their docket is 100% full. There's so many now legal firms out there because it wasn't just we just want to be appreciated because we had made contributions too. No, it's we don't like religion, we don't like Christianity, and we want y'all in the closet we came out of. Right. So they're legal firms, and if you're having a problem on your job or wherever, you want to make sure that you either call Liberty Counsel or they'll refer you to some of the other good guys. And then Richard, thank you for joining us. Your organization is Americans for Limited Government.
Correct.
Now, when you founded that organization, we were not where we are now with $32 trillion in debt.
We weren't.
And that has to do with politicians. And that has to do with elections.
It does. And it has to do with primaries.
And it has to do with primaries.
Okay, let's just be clear.
Let's just be very clear.
It's not you. If you elect somebody who believes in big government, it doesn't matter whether they've got an elephant or a donkey next to them. If they believe in big government, we need to elect people who believe that the power should be with the people. That's right. And not with the federal government. And the biggest aphrodisiac in terms of all this is people get to Washington, D.C., and suddenly they get power lust because, I can do stuff for Washington, D.C. I've got all this money to spend. And no.
Yeah, power corrupts. Absolute. Power corrupts absolute. Who was that, Lord Acton? Yep.
Yeah.
And guess what?
And everyone else that we've seen, 435 members. It's an insatiable thing. And you're absolutely right. It's
you don't get $32 trillion in debt on a partisan basis.
No, you don't. And I think that's where we're trying to sort through, and what's really challenging right now, and especially as we look at the GOP, and we're only looking at GOP because this is where we see activity. Right. Now, when somebody decides they're going to go after Biden, then we'll go onto the Democrat side too, but they're not deciding that yet, but people are getting into this GOP contest. And I think that the more they do know about these candidates, there are complaints that, oh no, we just came out of election, but it's starting again already. Well, it needs to, because people keep re-electing these guys. Right. What is it, 90-something% keep coming back, even though everybody hates Congress?
Yeah, if you're an incumbent and you don't drop out, you're going to get re-elected. It's a combination of money. You also know a lot more than the person who's running against you. Right. So, and most bills, believe it or not, they create these little bailouts where you can say that you voted for something when you really didn't. And so there's some trickeration that goes on it's my term, trickeration, that goes on when you're passing legislation to give people political outs.
So wait, you're saying that because on the second point that they don't know they know more.
Yeah.
You're talking about how to lie to their constituents.
Well, I'm talking about in terms of I'm talking about specifically. If you want to talk about Social Security, okay, somebody who's been working on Social Security their whole life, up here for 20 years, knows a whole lot more than the person who's sitting there talking about it. They can tie them up in knots.
But to your point, Stars, if they're not changing the outcome of Social Security, if it's still all systems go, then they're using that to lie to their constituents. They're using their knowledge to pull the wool over the heads of the individuals.
Holding on to.
Right.
I mean, there are some candidates that put it out there right away. I'm saving Social Security. I'm saving Medicare, and I think that that's one of the reasons that some of the candidates are now saying maybe we need a newer, younger generation to say this is a Ponzi scheme. This is not worth saving. If you were in a business, you can't do this kind of deal with people. And I think that we're adults. Voters are adults. If they're given more facts about what's really here, and especially if they want to reduce the size and scope of government, you can't say certain things are off the table.
Yeah, paying into something that you will never reap. You'll never reap the outcome of the amount of money, and the amount that you could save on your own would grow exponentially if the federal government wasn't taking it. And I think this generation is astute enough to start asking those questions. What Republicans have to be less afraid of is, the talking point that they have to combat from the Democrats saying that, you're pushing grandma off of the cliff. No, in reality, if we don't get this together, we're all falling off the cliff. The cliff will be gone completely.
Well, unless they keep borrowing and filling it up and pretending that the money's there and making our grandkids and great-grandkids much more broke. But that's when I was concerned even about the GOP response when Biden totally lied that they want to, take it away. They were protectionists. No, we're not. No, we're not.
They're afraid of making the tough decisions and tightening our belts in areas that we can do better.
Instead of just yelling out, it's broke, it's broke. Okay, so let's look at some of these candidates, because last week, you guys weren't here, and I didn't see you in Charleston. I don't know what you were doing, but there were thousands. I'm like, man, this girl, if she starts like that, those numbers were a lot bigger than some of the Trump rallies. So I think that she's to be taken seriously. But there are areas, she mentioned Social Security, but she also wants term limits. Well, President Garfield told us you want term limits, you have them. They're called elections. Right. So that's one of the advantages of starting a little bit sooner. So let's look at this Vivek Ramaswamy. Well, he wrote a book, Woke Inc., $1 million off of the shelf because people are concerned about this whole woke environment. Explain to me what that is, Rick, and what do you think about this campaign?
The woke environment is nothing more than an attack on political correctness. And the woke people are the politically correct. We're trying to impose that political correctness on the rest of us. And so
when someone hears we're after the woke agenda, what they're talking about is all of the police of your speech.
It's all those, it's all those months put together, okay? and the thing that's challenging about the woke agenda is it's taken over much of corporate America. A lot of the Wall Street investors are driven by something called ESG funds, which are essentially, we're going to support radical environmentalism, we're going to support socialist governance, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They invest in those things, even though those companies aren't profitable based on those things. So you end up with ExxonMobil. I think ExxonMobil actually did a resolution that opposed energy development, and you're like,
crazy stuff against their business. Come on. Yeah, but while they still have lobbyists here secretly making sure that their business is okay. But you're pointing out something that people should be concerned about, because when the terms started changing from stockholder to stakeholder, it allowed people that don't have a personal investment. So it's kind of the same worldview as the welfare state. It's really easy to spend other people's money and tell them what to do with their money when it's not yours.
Such a good point. Corporations are persons. They're treated just as you and I are under law. Corporations just means they can have a mission, they can have a goal and a purpose. And what this stakeholder thing is doing is saying, no, everyone is an agent of your own person. So we can steer your company and direct it to ultimately these social agendas, these governance agendas where, for instance, my brother's here, his company has 4 African American males that started, but they're getting, compliance letters that they're not, woke enough, or they're not diverse enough.
I'm not diverse enough.
But it's the same sort of thing, a standard that is set you lower the bar for everyone across the board, saying that we're going to set these sort of standards that we agree to at this time. Of course, it's always going to change depending on what the winds of change are in terms of the society, and consigning people in their corporations to follow these things.
Well, I think that's what Vivek was pointing out. Go ahead.
Ultimately, it's extortion, because what they're doing is they're saying, we're going to demonize you on social media. We're going to take away your capital. We're going to basically make it so you can't exist as a company unless you bow down to the green agenda, to the sexual identity agenda, to the entirety of the woke culture. And so they extort businesses, and they say, you know, I'd rather pay a bunch of money to these groups who are antithetical to my business than to fight them, because fighting them costs me more.
Cost me more. That, you know, I was saying that when B of A gave the BLMers their way to say, we're going to invest $1 billion in this stuff. People are like, what? They're crazy. I'm like, yeah, but to do what they wanted, put banks where banking doesn't occur, would have cost them $50 billion. I would have paid them out too. But so this Vivek, who's now running for the GOP in the primary, is bringing something new to the table. I don't know that it will pick up enough traction to say, you know, we're going to hire this former Wall Streeter to become our candidate, but it will be interesting to have discussions beyond the normal on some of these questions to help people sort through the noise of the news and look for what do I believe and why, and where should I vote. So is this a good thing to have a healthy discussion for a change?
I like the play. I like how big the GOP tent is in terms of who it's now being attracted to and inviting. That certain subjects that weren't ours to talk race, you know, we can't touch it if you're in the GOP. Those are certain things now that are now on the table.
We can talk about.
Which is
and
good.
I think to your other point is about how it is important. Our ethnicity and experiences do bring something to the table. There's no question. I think it's when the left politicizes it that we have a problem with it. But this is a diverse party now. So it is interesting to see folks that are either with ethnic background, but all American, 100% Ann Coulter, that they're bringing up new discussions finally to say, let's talk about other places that we should be concerned in our culture.
And the proper lens by which we should be interpreted, because ostensibly these GOP candidates are going to be principled. They're going to hold on to that American principle, but still be like a Nikki Haley, able to have, you know, an ethnic background that contributes to the conversation. And that's what America has always been about. We've never left that. It's the left that's hijacked it and said it's only this one outcome, and we're going to attach your labels to it in order for us to get to this conversation.
Ultimately, what the argument's going to be, and being made by people who look different on the Republican side.
And redheads are allowed.
Redheads are allowed, fortunately. But what the arguments can be, is to be the standard argument. Equality versus equity. And we're going to have, do you have equal opportunity to succeed and thrive, or are you all forced into the same outcome, regardless of our efforts, regardless of what we bring to the table? That is a fundamental argument in this country, and it is the argument that Vivek Ramaswamy will bring forward, because he's a smart guy. And if we don't tackle that simple question, equality versus equity, if we don't tackle that question head on, equity wins. Because that's government control, government power rolling forward.
But that's even another word they stole from the Bible. Because in the Bible, the very first proverb, he talks about gaining that wisdom because you want equity. And they just steal and redefine, and I just get so mad at it. And you have like 50 seconds because Tim Scott might be bringing into some of this discussion.
Yeah, we should jump on. But impartiality is what the Bible also points to. And it's never equal in outcome, but everyone falling equal before the foot of the cross. That's based on God's and Christ's principles. But if you're coming at it from a different angle, from a different starting point, and the left they don't want to end at the outcome at the cross, their equity is lowering the standard so that ultimately everyone's a king to themselves.
That's a beautiful point.
For them, the cross is in Washington, D.C., the power of government to impose versus the power that God empowers us to walk in his path and become the people who he created us to be.
That's right. With purpose, with meaning, the gospel of the Lord, changing hearts. Wow, what a way to end this particular show here on Cure America. You guys got to come back, you know that, because we're going to continue. And I'm kind of glad we didn't get into Tim Scott because he hasn't jumped in in yet, but he does have an exploratory, and he's in Iowa, and so people are talking about it. So I think that what we'll do in Cure Miracles, we're just going to talk about the ones as they get in it, because in that way we're not doing all the guessing games and all of that. Hey, join us again next week. Thank you so much for being here with us this week. Go to our website, curepolicy.org. This is how we support our work, is through generosity of people like yourself. And those of you that are already contributing, thank you, thank you, thank you. I actually see your names. I see who you are, especially those of you that are giving monthly to Cure. I see your names. I can't call you all, but I can thank you now. Really appreciate you, and we'll see you again next week. Oh, one more thing, the conclusion of the matter. Ecclesiastics, fear God, keep his commandments. That's man's all.